We're suffering from that thing, which is perfection is the biggest enemy of action. And the reality is there's projects that could do a lot of good, maybe with imperfect ways of measuring them, but that they should be started now. Capital exists and projects don't really. There wasn't enough projects out there that met the standards of what this capital was willing to finance. The biggest challenge to scale is not realizing what scale means. It's not only like bigger, it's just very different. Even if what the company as a whole is doing is something unprecedented, you can hire the right team that has done the same type of task, even if in a different industry. I don't need to have someone in the team building our financial models that understand every nitty-gritty thing about the nature restoration part. I want to have someone that is complying with the standards of what a financial buyer would want to see. Find something that you think is unsustainable and just change it. Just do it. Don't wait. Because if you want to build something meaningful, you have to accept that there will always be a bit of chaos.
Simón, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what Ponterra does in simplest terms?
Thank you very much for having me. It's super good that we finally got to do this chat. Ponterra is a developer and an operator of nature restoration projects. What that means is that we design, we finance and operate these very large-scale ecosystem restoration projects, mostly on degraded agricultural land. So if you want to picture what we do as a company, you should imagine very bare agricultural lands that have been chopped down or burned by the previous generations, or even just overexploited because of the agricultural practices that were being done there. And what we do is turn that into a native forest. So you should think forest and not plantations. You should think native species and not monocultures or like just one single tree species in a row. And we do that working directly with the owners, with the landowners, with the local farmers that own those lands. So we set up these joint projects, these very large scale projects that essentially transfer from degraded agricultural lands into native forest with the farmers. And why it's attractive to them, and that's part of the story on the business model, is because we do this and fund it by generating high integrity carbon credits and potentially in the future other forms of credits so that we can pay for these activities and in a way find a new economic reality for those lands. That's Ponterra. And me personally, I'm one of the founders of the company. I started this alongside my 3 other co-founders, Lee, Celia, and Andrew, a bit over 2 years ago.
So I want to come on to the whole ecosystem side of it in just a moment, but you've said that the real bottleneck in nature restoration isn't capital, it's project supply. Can you walk us through what made you realize that and how that's shaped the direction of Ponterra?
Yeah, I think we sort of saw this, but you're right. Capital exists and projects don't really. And I think what you're getting at is that I learned that sort of the hard way, let's say. Before Ponterra, I was a co-founder at another venture. It was called Bagheera. And what we did effectively was connect this capital that already exists out there with nature projects like the one that we're doing today. We had a great team. We had the technology. We even had some very good venture funding from great partners. But we kept running into sort of the same problem, the same wall, which is that there wasn't enough projects out there that met the standards of what this capital was willing to finance. So if there was someone out there that wanted to fund, again, like putting it in my current lens, a reforestation or nature restoration project, we were having a very hard time finding these projects. And I think that's when it sort of clicked for me that the bottleneck isn't really on the demand side, because there is plenty of very good capital out there that's seeing I mean like climate, if you want to put it, as a new industry. A lot of capital out there, but there isn't supply of high quality projects. And in a way, that's what we're doing with Ponterra. I think a lot of people underestimated how hard that is, that nature restoration in our specific case is not as straightforward as it seems. It's not just, planting trees. It seems simple, but it's physical, it's messy, it's, operational. And you need to work with landowners and farmers for a very long period of time. We need to convince them to participate in a project that effectively changes the way they live. So Ponterra is effectively born from that realization that I had before and that my co-founders shared, of course, that what we need is these high quality projects and the boots on the ground to build them ourselves.
It's funny to me because I feel like most people in the space try and stay as light as possible, but like brokering or partnering or outsourcing, that kind of thing. And you went completely the other way, like full vertical integration, 120 people on the ground. I guess you kind of explained why you've taken that route, but I guess did you know what you were signing up for?
Well, we definitely did not know what we were signing up for, but we had a very clear vision in mind. So I guess there's two sides to that question. At the bottom line, so one thing I didn't say in my introduction of what is Ponterra and what do we mean by saying that we're a developer and an operator? It means that we do everything ourselves. We say that we take care of the core part of the operations of a nature restoration project, from picking up the seeds, peeling them, storing them, whatever it is that we end up doing with that, all the way to planting, and then monitoring those plantation and the resulting selling the credits. So what you're saying on the broker, it's selling those credits, and everything that comes that has to be done over 30 years. Every part of those activities, someone with a Ponterra hat on is doing them. And you're right. I think that even though there's not a lot of players out there that are building projects like ours at this scale that we're doing it. So our first project, for reference, was 10,000 hectares, which is roughly twice the size of Manhattan. And that means like operating something as big as that with people on the ground doing operations. And again, there's people out there that are doing similar projects, not at this scale. And furthermore, those players traditionally have taken a different route, which is what you're saying, like outsourcing at least part of the core parts of this process. So whether that is like the environmental planning of what you're going to do on the land, outsourcing the planting to an NGO that is local, or more typically even like selling the credits through brokers, which is the example that you were giving. And I think that can work for small projects and smaller initiatives. But if you want to scale, you want to have that quality and control in your hands. And I want to like digging a bit deeper into what that means is that you're owning the results, and owning the results not only from the positive side, but also from the negative side. And I think that's been super important for us. And we can talk a bit about it, like our go-to-market strategy a bit later if you're interested, because it links to this. But effectively, in a nutshell, why we decided to do this is because these projects are very long-term. We're seeing this as a new asset class. And the only way in which we can have a proper communication with our buyers, and if a problem arises, say, for example, there's this thing that happened. I was not expecting it. But since I own the process and since I haven't outsourced this and I'm relying on a third party, I can also find a way to solve it. So in a way, the only way in which we could deliver the quality that we were hoping to deliver and the promises that we were making to the buyers is if we own the full stack and minimize our exposure to third parties. That doesn't mean that we don't partner with the right people, obviously. Like our whole team is built from the people that are with local people. So it's not like we just come up and develop a project on our own. No, our project in Panama has 60 employees. All of them, except for me, if I'm there, would be from the local region. So it's local talent. So in a way, you're just saying you're going to be part of the Ponterra family instead of saying continue to do what you're doing and I'll pay you for it.
What? Yeah, explain a bit more about the go-to-market strategy then.
Let me use our first project, which is what I was saying as an example. Right now, Ponterra has two large-scale projects. The first one is in Panama, which is these 10,000 hectares of native restoration in the great agricultural lands. And about a year ago, we closed a very large transaction, one of the biggest at the time in the nature and carbon credit space, with Microsoft, Rubicon Carbon, and Carbon Streaming as our funders and buyers of these credits. So we structured basically a pre-sale of all of these credits that allowed us to basically launch the operations with the certainty that the money was coming. So when thinking of the go-to-market strategy for this project specifically, and that's why I'm using it, because this company is not necessarily a company that then decides to do a project. It's more a project that then launches a company in a way. What our whole intention from the beginning was asking ourselves, what would it take for a company with the high standards of someone like Microsoft or Rubicon, one of the most sophisticated financial investors in the industry, to say yes to investing in this in a time horizon that is unprecedented. So pre-selling this until the duration of the project, which again is 30 years. And doing this not just through like a nice pitch, but through building the real trust. And I think the go-to-market strategy was Lee sort of taking every decision almost backwards. What does it take for us to get to that point? And then answering the questions based on that. And that's a way in which we realize, for example, what we were saying before on being full stack, that we had to be vertically integrated because otherwise they could not do the due diligence that they were hoping to do on us if someone else was doing it. We also had to build compliance frameworks that sometimes didn't even exist early on. We obviously had to hire a very serious team and also focus on the right practices. It also shaped a bit of how we structured our company. And I think the key to that, in terms, again, of like how to launch a company, was not reinventing the wheel. And I think that's something very applicable for other realms of sustainability or climate tech or whatever we want to call it, which is we're trying to find different ways of doing things that we've done for generations, just better ways, right? I'm trying to find ways in which we can continue to have agricultural lands without them being harmful to nature. So we could continue to have cows or like the crops that we have, but integrating it with systems that restore nature. And that's already something new. But again, how do you do this without reinventing the wheel? And this is also how we launched the company from the beginning. So for example, financing mechanisms for this type of projects. It's unprecedented for this asset class, but we do have precedents of others that have done it in the past, like renewable energies. They're very long-term projects, similar approach. So you have a company that says, I'm going to be building or like producing energy in a few years' time. Do you want to buy the energy now so that I can launch the project and actually put my solar panels? Good. So it's similar. Can we replicate the legal and financial construct that they have on that and apply it to a new asset class? So again, go-to-market is back solving. So product market fit is always important. I also knew that the hard way from Bakira. My company did not have a product market fit and we went bankrupt. So that was one. And the other one is like, if I'm trying to convince someone of doing something new, can I minimize the barriers of how I explain it by using some things that have worked in other industries?
Okay, real quick. If you're a sustainability founder and growth feels stuck, this part is for you. You're doing between 700K to 3 million in revenue. You've built something amazing, but growing it is just exhausting. Every lead comes from a referral. Every deal depends on you. And every time you try to scale, something breaks. Your pipeline, your sanity, or even worse, your impact. The problem is you are too close to see the real issues. You're trying to read the label from inside the bottle. That is exactly what we help you with at Plucky Bamboo. We work with Planet First B2B companies to find and fix the hidden bottlenecks that quietly block their growth, whether that's unclear positioning, weak lead flow, or a sales process that just doesn't convert. First, we uncover what's broken. Then, if it makes sense, we build the systems to fix it, so you can scale your impact without burning out. We've done this for companies like Blue Banyan and Scrap, and after hundreds of conversations with sustainability founders and CEOs, I know where the cracks show up when you start to grow. So if you're ready to find and fix what's holding back your growth and impact, visit pluckybamboo.com to see how we can help. Okay, back to the episode. It's very much the product of having clarity of vision, it sounds like, to me, more than anything else, because a lot of people get into it through like starting a company and pivoting, or timing happens to work out well for them. For you guys, it seems very much like you started this company with a mission. You knew what that first sale was going to be, I guess, or generally who that buyer was going to be. You knew you had the product market fit and you knew it was about that trust. And that vertical integration was almost like a byproduct of that. Could you tell me a little bit about the story behind that vision then? Was it a kind of conversation between all the co-founders? Was it one had the vision and they brought the others in. Tell me a little bit about that. I'm quite interested.
Yeah, so we're again four founders in this company. Up to now, I was based in London with Celia, my co-founder, and then we had Andrew in Panama on the ground from the first day in our project, and Lee, who is our head of investments in the US, having more of an interaction with the buyers. I think the one thing that we all had in common is that we had done something in this space before. So Celia is the founder of one of the largest gatherings of operators in the space. So it is a group that hosts both NGOs doing nature restoration and also the other few commercial companies that are doing it. So she had been working in the space and also in other companies similar to this one in the past. Andrew has been what he likes to say, an operator in complex projects in complex jurisdictions. So he's an operator at heart, and he had been working in the like the restoration of some and planning of some natural parks in other countries. And Lee had been innovating in this space, in the financial side of the space for a few years. She launched a bond that was aimed at forest conservation in the US. So all of us shared that we had worked in the industry before, but all of us had also the realization, without it being like a grand vision, that what we're missing is the boots on the ground. Again, not to repeat myself, but that what we needed was people that were willing to go and develop these large scale projects for which we were already seeing some demand. And so I think that was the shared vision. And it was also the idea that, there's sometimes like, again, I'll compare it to a similar industry, but we found ourselves that we're almost like in a similar space to what renewable energies was in a few decades ago, where there was sort of this already clear sense that we needed to find a way to source our energy differently in a clean way. Imagine, fast forward, if you were to have this discussion now, probably the type of solutions that people would want to build first was, I'm going to build the software. I'm going to build an intermediary. I'm going to build a marketplace. And I'm the first one that did this. I built a marketplace that didn't work because we were an intermediary in a very illiquid market. So let's say that I don't want to undermine those type of solutions, but there's always the need for that first mover. We're not the first mover. There's a few first movers of peers in these type of projects, but there is a need at this time of someone saying the equivalent of at the start of the renewable energies time, I'm going to pack my bags. I'm going to go to Egypt or wherever, and I'm going to build a solar plant from scratch, and then I'll find a way to operate it, whatever it is. So like there were more uncertainties in what we were trying to do. We already knew a bit like what was needed and what a high quality project looked like because we were talking with the buyers and all of us had been exposed to what you were saying. Like we had the privilege of already knowing the space, already knowing what someone like Microsoft was looking for. And we were all pretty excited, to be honest, about the idea of saying, hey, let's do it ourselves and let's get our boots dirty. So I think it was a pretty unique gathering of four people that met and knew that we had a shared vision in that sense. Plus the fact that we were all very excited with the idea of actually building these things ourselves is what sort of brought this special group together until, yes, let's make the operational company that needs to develop these projects.
With something as, I guess, big and complex as Ponterra, what's been the hardest part of scaling it over the past year? Has it been more about the operations, the partnerships, how you communicate value?
The biggest challenge to scale is not realizing what scale means. That would be my answer. What do I mean by that? It's very different when you're thinking of these large projects. And to be honest, it's very applicable across other climate and climate tech industries. When you're thinking of how the MVP, like the minimal viable product, looks like, and then how you transfer that all the way into something as big as what we're doing, the reality is that compared to other things that I've seen in the past, it's not only like bigger, it's just very different. So the whole system, if you're to do a pilot project on restoring 50 hectares, for example, maybe you can decide that you're not going to build a nursery, you're going to source saplings from someone else, right? You're not going to have your own production. That's a very obvious and easy example. Why? Because there's probably enough supply in the area or capacity for people to produce those small trees for you and you taking them directly to the site. If you want to produce enough saplings to plant 10,000 hectares, you need to do this at a almost industrial scale, right? So it's not only bigger, it's different because one, the model you're buying trees, the other one you're making them yourself. And this, I think, applies to many other many other realms of what we're doing. So the biggest challenge to scale is not understanding what scale means. I think part of it is the operational part of things. I think there's also a challenge, which is as developers, there's this in the whole project development cycle of these 30 years that it takes to develop a project like this. There's a part in the beginning which developers call the valley of death, which is you think you have a very good project, you think you have a very good initiative, but the results are still so far. The first credit is so far, and the capital needs to get certainty on some things is so high that I'd say the biggest barrier to scale for us and for the industry as a whole is this valley of death, is this early stage capital that can help us de-risk projects early on and bring these projects to what we call this Microsoft ready stage, which we were saying from a go-to-market perspective. We were very fortunate, I think, because we had the capital required to self-fund this, and then a very good group of buyers, very aligned with our mission, that engaged with us very early on. But I'd say, obviously, the operational side of how you do these things and how you plan for scale, which was the previous question, is very important. Understanding that it's a totally different mindset. It's almost looking at this from an industrial commercial approach versus the very artsy way of doing it on a smaller scale. The second one is just the capital barrier, because even though there is a capital out there, which is what we were saying before, it's sometimes hard to put it in the right place. And that, I think, has to do mainly because this is almost like an industry thing, but it's right now it takes super long to build that trust between a project developer and this buyer. And this is a very complex part because the reputational risk of getting it wrong is so high. So buyers hesitate. So if we were, now that we're doing it again and looking back and seeing what were the challenges, is that if we could make it easier in general for the industry and for projects to signal that credibility earlier so that they could get that early stage funding and be able to de-risk their operation sooner, we'd have many more projects, which for me is positive, not only for me, but for the industry as a whole. So that capital, that specific part of the capital continues to be a challenge.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how the space works in general, what would you change?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were saying now. It's finding the mechanisms. I don't know whether that is through better standards, trusted intermediaries in the case where you can do everything yourself, like we do, smarter verification tools for projects like this one that build the trust, even insurance. Insurance is a very big topic right now. So that buyers can have like a bit transparency earlier on to build that trust, and to deploy capital into projects. That would be a big one. I think the second one, which is a bit more abstract, let's say, is that we're suffering from that thing, which is perfection is the biggest enemy of action. So sometimes we justify perfection or we justify inaction with the look for perfection. And the reality is that some of the answers that we're looking for with these things, we still don't know. So for example, we have a very big focus on restoring biodiversity. We don't just like plan, like we were saying, that monoculture of trees to sequester carbon. We want to rebuild the whole system and rebuild the biodiversity that used to be there. Why? Because that has a whole range of ecosystem services far beyond carbon. What's the problem in the industry right now is that some people would justify not wanting to engage in more expensive biodiversity restoration and just go for the carbon part because they think that the methods to measure this biodiversity improvement are still not there. So they will say, oh, well, I like the idea, but since you can't really have one metric that currently encapsulates the biodiversity gain, I'm just going to stay away from biodiversity restoration altogether. And the reality is that there's projects that could do a lot of good, maybe with imperfect ways of measuring them, but that they should be started now. So I think better standards, more transparency, and more confidence. And that's something that's already happening. And I think thanks to transactions like the one that we did, we are collectively advancing the market. And the second one is getting rid of this narrative of like, yes, we need to be perfect in this, because that's just a way to justify not doing things. And I think that's a big enemy for, like, in general, moving towards a more sustainable system.
I completely agree. I often say it's like people letting perfect be the enemy of good. And it's people tending to get into arguments about smaller and smaller things. And whether that's a tool for procrastination or it's probably well intentioned, it just keeps everything back a bit more. You talked a bit about the trust side of things there. Obviously, with the way that you're doing it, the way that you're building this full stack integration, are there any other ways that you've seen that have worked to increase that trust?
Yeah. So one thing that I was talking about before was not reinventing the wheel in terms of using structures that have worked in the past and applying it to what you're doing now. I think that also applies to how you build a company and how you build a team around something that is new. Hopefully, that's also relevant again for other types of companies and industries. But very specifically for us, what that meant is that even if what the company as a whole is doing is something unprecedented, you can hire the right team that has done the same type of task, even if in a different industry. So if I'm going to build my financial model and I'm going to share it with my buyers, I want that financial model to be to the standards of what an investment banker would be building a model. I don't want to have a, I don't need to have someone in the team building our financial models that understand every nitty gritty thing about the nature restoration part. I want to have someone that is complying with the standards of what a financial buyer would want to see. Same thing with the operational and the scale. Well, we have our head of operations and technology, Jill. She hadn't worked in the nature restoration space, but she is an expert at scaling companies in the tech industry. You might be thinking, yes, but you said before, that you're the boots on the ground, the operator, and this is tech. But the reality is that the tech industry in the past decades has been an excellent example of how you build a company fast, and sometimes not actually, but most of the times doing it in a way that is sustainable and scalable. So who are we to put in charge of like building the infrastructure and the systems that we need to be able to scale at this rapid pace? Probably someone that has done it in the past, even if it's through the tech space. And I think there's there's definitely different examples of this mindset across our whole company. And that's definitely something that helped us with the buyers. Because yes, if we have the science team from the buyers wanting to know more about our MRV, which is measurement, reporting, and verification strategies, we're going to bring someone that really knows about that. And that is really linked to our activity. But if we want to get a sense of, or we want to prove, for example, that we have robust legal mechanisms to contract with the landowners, we want to have the best lawyer, not necessarily the best forester thinking of laws, but the best lawyer. And I think that's applicable to everything and every company and someone trying to build a company, picking the best of what someone's have already learned somewhere else and trying to put it in something different. And that's definitely applicable to other companies and other climate sustainability challenges.
Yeah, it's like hiring for experience versus hiring for the actual skills or the competencies, I think, is the more important thing. It can be easy to get blinkered into thinking someone has to have come from a specific experience in a specific company. But I think you're right. Like and it's not just at a company level, it's at a person level as well. And it's a little bit of a tangent, but with AI becoming so good at specialized tasks, it's now going to be up to people to become generalists instead of specialists.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to be a competent person that has that high agency, no matter which industry you've come from, is going to be valuable for other companies as well.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree.
Final question for you is, if you had one piece of advice for another founder in sustainability, what would it be?
It's always a challenge. I'd say just go for it. Maybe a bit more of an abstract reflection, because you said like the word sustainability. I think sustainability is one of the most like incorrectly used words of our generation, because sustainability at the end of the day just means that it's doable over time, right? Something sustainable is something that you can continue to do over time. I think that the moment that we are in and what our generation is facing is that a lot of the things that we will need to continue doing are not sustainable. So whether that is how you grow your food, how you make your buildings, to use other examples, how you operate those buildings, whatever it is, we do these through systems that are not sustainable over time. So if I had to give one piece of advice, if what you want to do, and you agree with me that it's a very exciting time to just think of ways in which we can continue to live our lives, but doing so in a way that is not basically jeopardizing our future generations and putting ourselves at risk because of the climate and biodiversity crisis. Find something that you think is unsustainable with that definition, that it can't continue to go on like this, and just change it. Just do it. Find a way to do it, to improve it. In my case, it's like we have a lot of degraded agricultural lands. I come from Spain. I've seen this myself, where we're desertifying our lands because of over exploiting them and making them unproductive. How can we solve that? Well, we need to restore nature, and we need to build systems that make that thing sustainable over a longer period of time. So find one of those things, go for it. And I guess don't wait, because if you want to build something meaningful, and this is from direct personal experience, you have to accept that there will always be a bit of chaos and definitely a lot of unknowns. So you should just get moving. And eventually, like, if you have the right narrative and just, again, a very simple framework of I'm trying to improve one system, one thing at a time, and just make it sustainable, I think that's a great way to start.
Simón, thank you very much for your time. How can people get in touch with Ponterra, learn more about it?
So yeah, you can follow us on our social media. I think we still have a lot of work to do there, but we definitely have presence across Instagram. I think we're ponterra.eco. Also at the website, which is www.ponterra.eco. Hit me up on LinkedIn or wherever on a personal basis. So yeah, whatever it is.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. It was great chatting to you. Take care.